right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is the first webinar of our 2023 year, so we're excited that Paula is here to host with us. My name is Dana Slowinski, and I am co-owner of Family Recovery Centers. We are an evening adolescent intensive outpatient program. We have locations in Lake Bluff, Hoffman Estates, St. Charles, and in April of this year, we are opening in Plano. We work with a wide range of adolescents and really from a dialectical behavior therapy modality, and we also incorporate other experiential modalities as well. Two program components I like to highlight are the parent involvement. So parents are on site with their kiddos 2 of the 4 evenings. So they're not only learning the skills right along with their kids, but they're also doing their own work so that we can really wrap around that whole family system. And then we also have a 24/7 on call. So our clinicians are available both to the kids and to the parents 24/7 to really help them with skills coaching and making change in their own environments. That is us in a very quick nutshell, but I do want to turn it over to Paula. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ryan Bright. But with that, I will introduce Paula Marucci. So she is an EMDR approved consultant and EMDR certified therapist. She's a national trainer for EMDR Consulting, LLC. She's a speaker and facilitator for advanced training, introduction to structural disassociation, ego state therapy, and EMDR therapy. She's a workshop provider on trauma and disassociation. As you can tell, she wears many hats, and we have had such amazing feedback about her webinars. She does many webinars and presentations all over the country. So Paula, with that, I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Once again, it's just a pleasure to be here. Happy 2023, everybody. I am going to skip over the introduction of myself. I spend time talking about being a trainer and EMDR and et cetera, but I really want to get to this topic of the intersection of trauma and addiction. This is like where my goal has been since the very beginning. A lot of my presentations that I've done so far all feed into this one topic. And so let's get started. So our objectives today are going to be, we're going to talk about what is addiction, but I know that you all know what addiction is. So we're going to look at it from the perspective of the DSM-5. And then we're also going to look at a continuum of addiction and make some connections between how the continuum of addiction and the DSM-5 connect, and how we can be using our continuum of addiction to teach not only adolescents, but to be teaching our parents. It's like a roadmap to addiction. That can be very helpful, just kind of organizes things visually. So we're going to go over that briefly. And then we're going to talk about trauma and dissociation and addiction and look at the similarities, because they are similar. When one is dissociative, they are in fact severing pain. When one is active in their behavioral or substance addiction, they are severing from pain. So the two go hand in hand, and which would suggest that we could treat both the same way. So we make that connection between addiction and dissociation. And then we're going to look at treatment considerations from a trauma-informed perspective and how that definitely could be integrated also into our addiction work. And then I've got some psychoeducation and tools. There's an extensive list here. I'm doing it the 2 hours with you guys today. This is my first intro into this topic. I'm doing a full day webinar with practicums in March, the end of March, that's being hosted by an organization through Canada, if you guys are interested in that. And then a colleague and I are putting together a 2-day intensive for advanced EMDR and addiction protocols integrated together. So this is a journey, as you can tell. What we're going to talk about today is one of my all-time favorites, and it is a must for everybody, which is polyvagal theory. And we're also going to talk about shame. Shame is really much at the crux of everything. And I don't know about you guys, but I just don't hear a lot about it. I know that there's some great people out there that talk about it, but when it comes to, and remember, I come from an engineering and a business background, I want to know what to do. I want the solution. I want the cure. So we're not necessarily going to talk about what that looks like today, but I do want you to know that there is something out there that's working very well. And so we're going to kind of look at what that foundation looks like. And then just mapping inner parts family. We're just going to talk about a little bit about parts work. And actually that's written wrong. Mapping inner family parts is what that's supposed to say. I can blame my dyslexia for that. The neurobiology, motivational interviewing, and group protocols, we're probably not going to have time, but if we do, I will at least introduce them. But I just wanted to throw a bunch of options out there so that I could think about what would be good to talk about today. So let's move on. So the DSM-4 and the DSM-3, I'm trying to think how far back I go. It's DSM-4. When it comes to definitions of addiction, it can, we can get into the weeds when we're looking at the 4 categories that they have for the DSM-5. Basically, they want you to speak to the 11 different criteria. And so if you just read this, if you read it about under the basic categories of social impairment, control, looking at risky use, and then the pharmacological criteria, we've put together, there was, I want to just kind of honor Kate Mahoney. I don't know if any of you know her, but she was a wonderful, wonderful spokesperson, mentor. She advocated and did a lot of work with substance use in the day, which would be a while back. And when I worked with her, the organization put together what's called the Continuum of Substance Use and Abuse. And we use this to work with parents. We use this to work with adolescents to teach them how one then ends up in dependence, because this is not necessarily, it's not a choice, right? At least most of you that are listening to this, we know that it's not a choice. At least at some point it becomes not a choice. And so, Bruce Perry tells us that if we can tell our own story, that's the beginning of the healing. And so we really walk through here with the continuum of substance use, looking at how one would start in experiential. You're in school and you go to a party, or you're at home and there's a celebration, and you basically experiment with some type of substance or behavior. And then it becomes social. We can see how that can happen, but we're breaking it into those categories that are part of our diagnosis. And so we're able to literally identify that, for example, the risk of settings. When you're in experiential, there's no risk. When you're in social, you avoid risk. You make sure that you're in an environment where maybe you're in a basement or you're safe. And this is like when our clients are first starting to use. Usually this line right here is thicker, because if you shift into habitual, you have an 80% chance of ending up into dependence. And it's the habitual form of use where we start to need to have our substance or behavior. We start to recognize patterns. We are looking at loss of control in certain settings. And as you move from habitual into abuse, now we've got changes to the brain that are happening. And the frequency of our use is no longer predictable. We are experiencing more and more loss of control. But down here with our ability to stop is where it becomes key for therapists, because if you're considered in the abuse category, you're still able to work with change with your therapist. Whereas when we move into dependence, this is a must-have to feel normal. This is a use where there is no control. There are no limits. There's a significant amount of time invested in looking into our use, and change requires help and commitment. So this would be where we would need our client to commit to or accept a higher level of care. SAMHSA did a really nice job of breaking this down into numbers, which works for me. If you use 22 days or more, you're considered in dependence. If you can use 22 days or less than 22 days, which comes out to be 5 days a week, you're considered in the abuse category. And so if you have, and I'm talking about early use because I do work with a lot of adolescents, that when they come in, and anybody for that matter, I have a mother that comes in and she thinks that she's drinking too much and she wants to work on that. So we talk about the number of days of use and can you go 2 days without using? We have a different breakdown for weed because weed use now becomes morning to night. And it is also about if we're using every day. So we contract with our clients. If we end up in the dependence category, then we need to elicit more change, which would be a higher level of care, which there's a lot of really wonderful options in the area. So then just to scoot back to our definition of and our DSM criteria, all of these criteria fall within our continuum. And so this just makes it a more organized way to understand how we ended up in this dependence category to begin with. And it's the dependence category and the higher level of care, especially being a trauma-informed EMDR therapist, of where we're seeing the gaps in treatment. The success rate is low. You go into a higher level of care. Let's say you go into rehab. The success rate is 1 in 10. The average amount of rehabs is 5 to 6 before we start to experience success. We have a lot of problems with our fellowship. Addiction is in isolation and recovery is in community, and we need to find communities for our clients. There's a higher power piece that can be an issue. It's harm reduction versus abstinence that's an issue. We have all kinds of things that are coming into play here that makes it really confusing for our therapists. So I have taken upon myself, being, like I said, a trauma-informed therapist, to really hone in and start focusing this year on how can we be applying our trauma-informed resources to assist the addiction therapists, because there are so many gaps in the treatment. One of the things that I wanted to point out here, and this is something that I'm doing, I'm playing with my PowerPoint skills, is that this is my website, and my website is primarily, it is available for all of my consultees, my trainees, and so anybody that listens to a PowerPoint. And so the resources, you go to the first page, and then you just see if this is going to work or not. Let's see here. Actually, it's not going to work. That's too bad. Anyway, it's supposed to go to the link of the resources. But if you go to the resources, under resources, you're going to see EMDR, you're going to see dissociation, you're going to see addiction, and you're going to see polyvagal. And those, all four of those is what we're going to be talking about today. So shifting into the connection, at what point does trauma and addiction intersect? So first of all, we want to look at the definitions of some of these words and the roots. And so addiction comes from, or can be translated into to devote, to sacrifice, to sell out, to betray, to abandon, to be enslaved. And I like this form of the definition in that, in my world, addiction is not a choice. Addiction is a brain disease-ish. There are going to be a lot of different aspects of the definition, but that when you have moved into that dependence, that you are no longer in charge of your use, that your brain is in charge of your use, that you need your either drug of choice or your behavior of choice to feel normal in order to function, and that's something that is out of your control. Once again, being able to slide into the abuse category and say, okay, maybe you do have some control. So it's a nice way to really be able to put a definition to, if a client is in fact experiencing a brain disease where the addiction is required for them to function, versus in that abuse category, 21 days or less, where you have control and you could be utilizing higher level of care or your therapist as a way to work with reducing your use and moving into some of those other categories. A big voice today, and we'll see if it's, let me just see if it's going to work before. Yes. Okay, good. A big voice today in addiction is Gabor Mate. Dana, you're going to have to tell me if the volume works, because this is kind of what I'm worried about with this new Zoom adjustments. But Gabor Mate, just in case it doesn't work, all these videos are on my website. Gabor Mate talks about, we're not talking about like the addiction and what we're addicted to. What we need to really be asking is, what's the pain? Where is the pain? Where did the pain come from? And what are we doing about the pain? Because the pain at the end of the day is what we're trying to separate or sever from. And that actually is by, interestingly enough, is also the exact definition of dissociation, but we'll get to that. So Dana, just let me know if this volume comes up.
No, I'm not hearing it.
Okay. All right. So the videos are not going to be working today, which is a shame. Okay. So anyway, like I said, Gabor Mate, it's a 3-minute video. I don't like to bore you guys too much with the videos, but the video basically talks about how pain is what our focus needs to be on. And then as far as Gabor Mate is concerned, all addiction is rooted in trauma. And that trauma is going to be emotional pain. So then looking at the word trauma, a lot of you have probably heard about PARTS work. It's becoming a huge topic in therapy rooms. It's internal family systems is probably the most popular, but just remember, when we do PARTS work, it's important for us to pull from all of the different protocols out there, because there's different takeaways from each one that are important. But one of the really interesting aspects of internal family systems is that there are 3 main parts. And the parts that are the defensive parts are going to be, let's say, for example, an addictive part would be a defensive part. But the parts that we want to work with for a client is the wounded part. And the wounded part is trauma, comes from the Greek word wound. So once again, looking at the connection between all 3 of these words, because when we think about trauma, Peter Levine says that it's perhaps the most avoided, the most ignored, belittled, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. I train about 100 therapists a month. And actually, I should say it's a part 1 and a part 2 and 5, or we do 5 days. And we do talk, EMDR is the training, but really what we're doing is all of those therapists walk out of a training being trauma informed. It's important for our therapists to understand what trauma is. And trauma, at the end of the day, is a wound that a client has experienced. And it's going to be their wound, because Bruce Perry talks a lot about, what happened to you. It's about, what is your narrative? What is your story? And once again, if we go back to our continuum of addiction, it's like, what was your story? You started as experimental at some point in time in your life. It might have been when you were 8 years old, and your parents would put drinks that they hadn't finished in the fridge, and you were just, drinking what was sitting there on the shelf, and it made you feel good. Where did the experimental come in? And then how did it become social? Did you find that the social worked because it was when you felt like you were connected, when maybe that was your family of choice, because there was so much that was chaotic and dysregulating at home? And then when did it go from being social to habitual, where there was more structure around being around the drug, alcohol, or behavior, as opposed to, doing what you used to do? You used to hang out with your friends that you grew up with in middle school, but now you're hanging out with a new group of friends that are using on a regular basis. This is when we start to cross that line. And so being able to make the connection to how the trauma fed into the continuum of use that then fed you into the category of abuse or dependence, and looking at dependence as now being the categories that we fulfill in our DSM-5 to give you the diagnosis of substance abuse disorder, and looking to see if it's mild or intense, and then looking at what it is that you need for level of care. So what was the summary there on this? Kind of got off tangent. The end of the day, we need to be trauma informed. Everybody needs to be trauma informed. Being trauma informed is not that difficult. And I'm hoping that a lot of our master's programs have trauma classes. I did not have that when I was in school, but then we're not going to talk about how long ago that was. Not why the addiction, but why the pain. That is what Gabor Mate will speak to. It's Bruce Perry. What happened to you? We look at trauma triggers as those past present connections. If I'm angry today because somebody said something to me, like let's say a boss told me that I was lazy, and my past present connection is, in the past, my alcoholic father told me I was lazy all the time. We call that the 20-80 rule, where 20% of how we're being affected in the moment is today, and 80% comes from the past. So that past present connection is part of being trauma informed in the trauma work. But what we're looking at is if we can desensitize that trigger, if we can, Daniel Siegel says, name it to tame it. If I can say the reason why I'm angry is because you said I was lazy, and the reason why lazy triggers me so much is because my alcoholic father called me lazy all the time, and he was the lazy one. And then if we can name it, Daniel Siegel tells us how that automatically will bring down the intensity of the trigger. And then also, if you were to use one of the, I think there's 4 recommended tools for trauma-informed care. If we were to use one of those tools, for example, EMDR, we could desensitize that trigger. So then it no longer triggers us to then want to disconnect from the pain, which we are using with our substances or our behavior. Dissociation. There are a lot of our therapists that don't know what dissociation is, or they've heard the word, but they're not sure. But dissociation is how a child separates or severs from their pain. Dissociation generally starts under the age of 7. So this is a client that's using a substance, because dissociation releases opiates into the bloodstream. It is a way for a child to numb, separate, or sever from pain. So you can imagine that if you have a child that's already able to do this, and like I said, the average amount of dissociation happens before the age of 7, then they move into substances from an experimental, then a social, then a habitual, because they're finding that now they have a more acceptable way to dissociate. They have a more acceptable way because, as your adolescent will say, everybody's doing it. It's just that those that are going to become addicted or dependent or in the abuse category are going to be the ones that had the trauma background to begin with, that then activated their ability to dissociate. At what point do trauma and addiction intersect? Once again, we've got 80% of women that seek treatment for addiction report a history of physical or sexual assault. We have 70% of young people seeking treatment for addiction. They report history of trauma. Men with substance abuse disorder are more than 7 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, and women 12 times more likely to suffer from PTSD. So we want to look at the addictions as a real natural, sorry, that's wrong, natural, recognize, and how to resolve identified trauma. So it's utilizing, this is for some reason the language on this is wrong, but I'll rephrase it. Looking at it as addiction as a way to resolve our identified trauma. And if we as therapists can assist the client with their narrative, with their story, and to understand what it is that they need to numb or separate or sever from, it then will normalize why addiction might have been so appealing or easy to engage with to begin with. I was just sharing with Dana and Ryan, I have 4 nieces and nephews, and 2 of my best friends' kids are at Michigan State. The night before last was a horrific experience for those kids. And there are 50,000 students on that campus, of which 2 of them were at the shooting of the 4th of July in Highland Park. So there is trauma. There is trauma, and these are going to be students. These are going to be kids that might come from a good enough attachment that are going to be experiencing trauma, a worldwide unprecedented pandemic, not to mention that they can't go places without feeling like they may get shot. And that if they don't necessarily already dissociate, that they would go straight to substances. But once again, it's just about, we need to understand trauma and how to work with trauma to then assist us with then going into working with wherever substances get in the way of our client's ability to function. This comes from Dr. Frank Anderson. He writes a lovely book on parts work and trauma and addiction. He was at the addiction conference out in Las Vegas. The guy is actually pretty funny. He's like, why are we doing an addiction conference in Las Vegas? And I'm like, dude, good question. Why are we? Like, nobody could figure that out because it was in person. Anyway, so he talks about the different types of trauma. And so for those of you that are trauma informed, this is all going to look familiar to you. But for those of you that are not, it's really important to know the different levels of and different aspects of the type of trauma. So an acute trauma would be exactly what those kiddos just went through. They all went home from Michigan State. They're all in their homes and with their families right now, trying to figure out what the frick just happened. And this is something that can be resolved within the first month. If those students that were, there were shootings in the student union, which is where a lot of kids hang out, and there were other students that were in their history class and shooting just came, the shooter just came up right behind them, that we can go in and we can resolve that trauma that they experienced within the first month. That will then head off the PTSD diagnosis that's going to follow after 1 month and then into a lifetime. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a very specific diagnosis that is assigned to and connected to a one-time criterion event, which, for example, could be this particular shooting. I'm just using it for an example because it's in my brain. It was a rough day yesterday. But here we have complex PTSD, and this is a tough one to talk about because there's not even a diagnosis for it at this point. And complex PTSD is going to be a repeated interpersonal violation with no escape. It's going to be that chronic sexual, physical, or emotional abuse that's happening over and over and over again by those primary caregivers that are supposed to keep you safe. This is the kind of trauma that you can almost be guaranteed that there is dissociation. And like I said, dissociation shows up under the age of 7. And dissociation is the separating or severing of pain. Addiction is the separation or severing of pain. So you can see how that transition can happen so easily. We've got developmental trauma that's going to then also get in the way of the clients. If you look at Erikson's developmental stages, this developmental trauma is going to get in the way of their ability to move into the phases that they need to go through in order to launch as healthy, independent adults. We have a lot of adolescents, or I should say, we have a lot of 20-somethings living at home right now for a lot of reasons. But and they're doing substances, right? And then there's the extreme and the dissociative trauma. And this is going to be more along the lines of just, for example, let's say ritual abuse, some type of ritual or mind control abuse, which unfortunately there's a lot more out there than you would ever imagine. And so this is the extreme. And then of course there's going to be substances and behavioral addictions that are going to be involved there. Another way that we can assess trauma is the ACEs. And I would imagine that a lot of you've heard of the ACEs, and I'm not a professional with the ACEs, but all I know is that when you look at the 10 areas of trauma, it would be no surprise to you that the higher the ACEs, the more the connection to addiction. So looking at, once again, in the abuse category, we have physical, sexual, and emotional. Looking in the neglect category, we have emotional and physical, and then we have a loss of a parent, domestic violence, any other substance addictions, substance use disorders within the home, mental illness, and then criminal behavior within the household. Now, the ACEs that we use can be a little bit deceptive. Like this is just, once again, just kind of categorizing, you know, this is it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These are the categories for ACEs. So it's not a difficult thing to score for our clients. But Philadelphia came out and did an ACEs of their own, because they found that, and I don't have the statistic, but I want to say the original ACEs was done with the majority of white people. And so what Philadelphia did, since their population is not just white, is they went in and they added, and I think this is important, racial and social conditions, and then looking at historical generational trauma. And so if you're looking for an ACEs that has extra questions that are thrown in there that might be more, might be closer to the special populations that you work with, just know that we have 2 options. But when we look at the ACEs, and this is going to be based off the Philadelphia ACEs, these are the categories that they added. You know, we just looked at the 10 categories, but now we're going to be witnessing violence. You're going to be feeling discriminated against. You're going to be, you know, is your neighborhood safe or not? Bullying, huge, right now for our younger folks, and then living in foster care. So just know that the Philadelphia ACEs is out there, and that it's a more realistic measurement of what type of trauma our clients are experiencing. But so breaking down the amount, the number of ACEs, we've got 61% of adults had at least 1 ACE, and 16 had 4 or more ACEs. And then if you take the ACEs and you break that down into our statistics, we see that, you know, 0 ACEs, this is going to be your statistics. I'm not going to read them all over. 3 ACEs, and then 7+. Looking at our numbers of committing suicide, 1 in 5, HIV use, 1 in 30, 1 in 6 is alcoholic, and having 7 ACEs isn't a hard thing to do. In fact, so we used to do this every once in a while in our trainings, and we were, obviously, people were kind of shocked that they had high ACE scores, and then we realized that it was dysregulating them too much to focus on the learning, and so we stopped doing it. But we're looking at how addiction shouldn't be called addiction. It should be called the ritualized compulsive comfort seeking, and that would be due to the complex trauma. It's not the drugs, it's the ACEs, and that, you know, that comes from their website. So once again, looking at how trauma is the root of addiction, and Gabor Mate, that's like he's doing a book tour right now, and sharing with the whole world that everything, mental illness, all of our physical ailments, our medical ailments, all come from trauma. And so today we're just focusing on addiction, but that trauma is everywhere, and that trauma starts young. and that we need to figure out that, we're given this ability to numb ourselves, to separate ourselves, to sever from the pain that we experienced. And so addiction would only make sense that we would roll right into it at an older age.
Paula, really quick,
Yeah.
there's 2 hands raised. Would you want to take
Sure,
those questions?
absolutely.
Okay. So,
Yeah, because I don't have the videos. We have lots of times for questions.
okay, so Gordon, I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Gordon, you're muted.
Okay, I will go to
I think
Linda.
that I had no video.
Linda.
You go to what?
Linda had or no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, Linda had a question. 1 second.
Okay, and tell Gordon to put it in the chat.
Linda, did
She's muted also. There's
Yeah.
something going on with this, with the volume.
they should be, if they just unmute themselves, you should be able to talk.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I was just wondering, what would be, a good way to review the parts and the internal, family systems model, the 3 main
Sure.
parts?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, it's not that difficult. Okay, there's a waiting list of 10,000 people and it's a 2-year course that costs thousands of dollars, but it's not
Oh,
that
wow.
difficult. No, it's so I've got a parts piece at the very end, and I have a 2-hour video that I did thanks to Dana and Ryan that's on my website about just an introduction to parts. There's several different ways that we can look at parts, but at the end of the day, we all have different aspects of ourselves. So if our client comes in and says, they had a really bad weekend because the weather was crappy, their dog got sick and had to go to the vet, and their kids were, bored and were not respectful, we automatically start to integrate parts work language by saying, oh, so what I hear you saying is there's a part of you that was really upset about the weather because you wanted to get outside. And I like to use parts and aspect, and I interchange them. And there's another aspect of you that was really upset because your dog went to the vet. And then I'm also hearing that there was a part of you that was really upset with the kids because they were so disrespectful this weekend. Am I hearing that right? And so when we're talking about addiction, we can say, and there was a part of you that really, really wanted to drink this weekend. And then I also hear that there was an aspect of you that did a really good job of, let's say you do the 12-step model, you did a really good job of attending meetings and calling your sponsor. And then we learn how to get those parts engaged. Like, is there another part of you that can, honor and validate the aspect of you that wanted to drink this weekend because it was a stressful weekend, and drinking has always been a way for us to cope. And so we just want to validate that urge that you had, and then good job for the part that was able to come in and call your sponsor. So that we just kind of divide our sessions up into using the language and as opposed to like sitting down and trying to educate them on it. That's just an example. Does that help, Linda?
It does. And you said something that I was going to ask, which is whether or not a part of your approach includes educating the client about the different parts and how those function.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where the different models come in. So internal family systems puts a lot of language to every single part. Like there's a wounded part, and there's a manager part, and they call it a firefighter part, and they define what each part does. And that's fine. That's for people that have a harder time wrapping their brain around what exactly parts are. I personally enjoy transactional analysis, and on the video that's on my website, I talk about several different models, and transactional analysis says that you and I, our parts are created by every single transaction we've had since birth. And so transactional analysis would actually have you map a part, do a inner family map with your client and teach them about how they have 5 different parts or aspects of themselves and what that would look like. So I guess my answer is that there are many different ways that we can look at this, and that it's in your best interest as a therapist to kind of learn a little bit about each one, which is why I did that webinar to begin with, which I think I introduced 3 different ways that we can look at parts work. And that was, Ryan and Dana once again inviting me to introduce parts to therapists. So I'd start there with that video, just because it's free and it's available, and decide, maybe where you want to go next as far as what different parts protocols appeals to you.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Paula, there's also another question in the question section. So it just says, is this true for other addictions besides alcohol, chemical addictions, for food, pornography, internet, etc.?
All of it. Yep. And if you think about it with parts work, you've got a part of you that gets up and eats at 10 o'clock at night. And then you have another part of you that when you wake up in the morning shames you. We want to break them into pieces, not pieces. We want to break them into different energy. And we want those different energies to be separated out so that we can have conversations. It's like, this is our team. And our team has an aspect of us that goes and eats peanut butter off a spoon at 10 o'clock at night because our day sucked. And then there's another aspect in the morning that wakes up and says, I can't believe you did that again, you loser. And I'm just using a very mild example of, a client of mine that eats at night. And then just the mess with you guys, we do EMDR on the eating peanut butter at night, and it goes straight to sexual abuse. So, there's a lot we can do, I guess is my point. Yeah. And, porn, shopping, gambling.
Okay, great. I think that's it for now.
Okay, awesome. All right. And so my heart is a little broken. I can't, you guys that have seen me before, I love my videos, but, and they're short, so I'm not going to worry about it. But so you get to hear me. So ask questions, because we're going to have a little bit of extra time. But okay, so now here we are. We've talked about trauma, and we've made that connection between trauma and dissociation. Dissociation is an adaptive coping strategy. It is in service of survival. And I want you to remember that when we have our kiddos that are experiencing trauma, that there is going to be a strategy of some sort. There's going to be a part of them that evolves in service of their survival. Okay, so, for example, I have a client that comes in as a 20-year-old, and she's constantly being accused of lying. And I say to her, tell me a little bit about the lying. How far back does it go? Oh, I've been lying since I was 6. Okay, well, what did lying, what did that evolve out of? Like, what kind of situation? Oh, well, if my room wasn't clean, if I didn't do my homework, I get smacked. So I would lie and tell, them that, yes, I did this. Yes, I did that. Yes, I did this. And so, in other words, this part of you that lies is in service of your survival when you were a child. Yes. So we want to validate and honor that. Wow, that part was a hero. That part kept you from, getting hit on a number of occasions. And so it would only make sense that for you right now, that when your autonomic nervous system, which we're going to talk about, anticipates or is picking up on danger, that your go-to automatically is going to be to lie. So this is where we can take a adaptive strategy in service of survival that's maladaptively servicing us, this is how we want to start working with it. Okay, I'm getting a little off topic. So addiction starts with solving a problem. And it's the problem of human pain, emotional pain. So how do we look at the addiction? So I'm just going to quote a couple people that are brilliant in this field. The attempt to escape from emotional distress. Okay, we know that any of our addictive behaviors will separate us or sever us from some type of emotional pain. The actual message is, I am suffering and I need help. And this is Gabor Mate. So when a client is coming in and they're struggling, like my one client that came in and she drinks every day, and she is also drinking her children. She's also driving her children under the influence back and forth to school. And am I hearing, oh, that's, we can't be doing that. That's not a good choice. It's, I am suffering and I need help. That's what I'm hearing my clients say. That addiction is a form of dissociation, that this particular client, when going back and looking at the trauma work, she had been experiencing trauma since birth, basically. Her mother was an alcoholic and her father was not available. He was never around. He was always working. And it was a very chaotic and scary home that she was in. And she learned to dissociate very quickly. And then when she started to drink beer at 14, she switched to beer. And now as a 42-year-old mother is still drinking beer. So there's the connection. There's the timeline that we're looking for. The dissociation is to sever or separate a moment or aspect of self. So that would be that wounded part, that part that's in pain. Once again, I'm suffering and I need help. And dissociative responses are to meet a need or protect ourselves. And so we look at dissociation, which then transition into addiction as a superhero, as a like I said, a strategy in service of survival, as a way to assist with that client's ability to get their attachment needs met. So here we are with the word dissociation, and dissociation is separation. So we've got trauma, meaning wound. We have addiction, meaning slave, and we have dissociation, which is the separation from the pain. And so you can see where all three of these words work together, intersect, and are basically coming, from the same thing. So we've talked about, we know what addiction is, and we talked a little bit about what trauma is, but let's talk about dissociation. And I have done dissociation part 1 and part 2 for you guys. So if this is a review, it's just a short one. So dissociation basically breaks down into 3 major aspects. I don't think so. I see this. One is going to be, I'm going to start here in the middle, is amnesia. Dissociation basically blocks out either large chunks of time, 5 to 10 years old, or there's time lost during the day. I don't remember what I did today. And so, and amnesia is a major red flag and a very important aspect of dissociation. Depersonalization is going to be the detachment of self. So it literally is going to be the client feeling that their body is separating from their physical self to their sense of self. And so, for example, and this is a highly traumatized and dissociative client, she's walking down a sidewalk and she's walking in front of the house where she was perpetrated against, and she literally feels herself go behind the bushes to hide, but her body is still walking down the sidewalk. That would be depersonalization. And then derealization is escaping from reality. It didn't happen to me. That wasn't me. And so these are 3 aspects of what dissociation can do for us. And it is once again, it's in service of survival. It is in service of the client being able to function And so if they have to go to school during the day and sit in class and learn, and they go home to abuse at night, the dissociation helps them deal with the night. But I'll be honest with you, it's not ADHD necessarily that's keeping them from focusing during the day. It's dissociation, because their body is on guard for danger 24/7, because somebody is sneaking into their bed at night, or somebody is abusing them when they get home from school. That's just a side note. So how do trauma therapists measure dissociation? Well, we have what's called the color-coded DS, which is such a gift. And you don't have to know anything about dissociation to use it. But what we do is we give this to our clients, and then we measure look at the average score, and we go in, we interview the client on each question. So one of the questions is, when you look in the mirror and you don't see yourself, and somebody says that 60% of the time, we want to know what that means for that client. Like, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? And is it adaptive or maladaptive? And the client may say, well, when I look in the mirror, I don't see myself. And I'm really happy about that because I'm disgusting. So that would be an example of how dissociation is adaptive for the client. Whereas if the client says, it creeps me out, I just get so freaked out when I look in the mirror and I don't see myself, then I'm avoiding every bathroom with a mirror. That would be an example of it being maladaptive. As you saw here, shoot, don't mess with me. Oh boy, I shouldn't have done that. Hold on one second here. How do we get out of this? Hold on, guys. Take a quick stretch break, because this happened to me before and it took me a minute to figure out how to get out of it. Is the screen up?
It is.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry about that. I have to stay away from those videos. There's something going on.
Hey, Paula,
Okay,
there
so-
is another question. Do you want me to throw it out? Or
Yeah,
wait?
go ahead. Throw it out there. Yeah.
Okay. It says, is it amnesia disassociation if someone remembers 5 to 10 years old, except for what happened when he slept with his dad during those years? Does it need to be complete absence of memory, or can it be amnesia about the assumed sexual abuse?
Yeah, it would be spotty. I'm assuming that that's what they're talking about, where you would have some memories and not other memories. That for the most part, that chunk of time is very questionable as far as memories, but there would be certain aspects. Is that what they're saying?
I think so. Yes. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, we call them amnestic barriers, and those barriers are there for a reason. The client cannot function with all the memories, and there would be assorted memories. There could be a memory, like you said, of that particular incident, but there's probably a lot of other memories behind it that would be very dysregulating for the client. And so hence, if those memories start to get activated, like, for example, you have children and those children are at the same age as you were when you were abused, that's when we can start seeing any type of addictive behavior or use really pick up. Make sense?
Yes, there's a couple more coming
Okay,
in.
go ahead. It's fine.
Is this disassociative screener free? I've never used it and it looks amazing.
So, okay, so so in very small print, it says that you can't use it if your clients have been under the influence, which which is kind of funny because this is exactly what clients experience when they are under the influence. But yes, you can use this for anybody that's not actively using. And we use it in as a trauma therapist. This is part of what's taught in the basic EMDR training so that you become trauma informed. It's on my website, emdrchicago.com, under resources, under dissociation. And please use it as much as you'd like. It is a wonderful tool.
Great. Okay. And then could you speak to the link between disassociation and intense physical symptoms without medical explanation?
So, okay, let me think about this. Dissociation and physical. All right. So, I have to put my trauma trauma hat on. So what happens is, so Body Keeps the Score, right? I believe it's still on the top seller list. Body Keeps the Score because every aspect of our body holds our trauma memories. So even though the client may not remember being sexually abused or the extent of the sexual abuse, the body does remember. And so what we have to be careful of is if we go in and activate the body, then that's going to then reveal the trauma story. So that's why dissociation is able to separate. And if we look at, I want to go to the next slide. If we look at the next slide, these are examples of dissociation, standing next to oneself. So that would be the body separating from oneself during the abuse. So the body holds the memory, but the self leaves. And I know that sounds kind of, for those of you that are not trauma informed, that can sound kind of crazy. And at the end of the day, if you take enough drugs, you're going to be doing the same thing. So that's why we're trying to make this connection, because if I'm taking a drug of choice, or I'm able to, find some type of behavior that separates me from the pain that I'm experiencing, we're doing exactly the same thing that we do when we dissociate. So
Okay.
Does that answer the question? So the trauma's in the body no matter what. The dissociation separates the client from that trauma story. And then trauma-informed therapists are about working with that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And then we also have someone that has raised their hand. So Natalia, I'm going to open it up to you. Okay, Natalia, you are muted if you're trying to ask a question.
I'm so sorry. There was a mistake. So sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, and then actually Allison as well.
Hi. This kind of off topic. I overheard that you said, I kind of missed it. When you were talking about marijuana, and just like the amount of days that someone is like, would qualify to be on dependence or addiction spectrum. Cause I have a few clients in my caseload that are dissociating through marijuana. So
Sure.
I number that you said.
Oh, and thank you so much for saying it that way, because you're absolutely right. So yes, marijuana is treated differently. So SAMHSA has a wonderful manual that they put out years and years and years ago. And so with drinking or other types of, it depends on the drug or the behavior, but you can break it down into days. But then what they do, especially for THC, is they break it down into time slots. And so you would have a time slot of 6 to noon, noon to 6, 6 to midnight, midnight to 6. And then you would be having the client also record when they use. And if they use before noon, the goal is to get them to use after 12 so that that time slot can be open. And if they, if they use at 3 in the afternoon, can we get them to use at 6 p.m. If they use till 1 a.m, can we back them up and have them only use till midnight? So it's just more of a measurable way to work with the client in reducing their use. And so we don't do that with the drinking per se, because most people drink between 6 and 12. That was just the only thing I was saying. And I should get that resource of the protocol that they have, because it's there's a lot of great resources in there. I'll get that up on my website under the addiction category, because it's something that I've been using for years. So then you'd have that information. Does that sound good?
Okay, Allison, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Paula.
Okay, great. So moving into, so once again, this is just kind of an example of the questions that we just saw that are part of the DS, which, like I said, anybody can use. And the DS that's on my website, there's also an adolescent DS, and there's also a checklist for children. So standing next to oneself, looking in the mirror and not recognizing oneself, having the experience of feeling that others, people, objects in the world around them are not real, have the experience of feeling that their bodies do not belong to them, having the experience of being in a familiar place, but finding it strange or unfamiliar, feeling as if you are looking at the world through a fog so that people or objects appear far away and unclear. Just know that trauma therapists are talking to their clients about this all the time. And what does this sound like? You know, it sounds like a client that is doing the exact same thing in a different way, utilizing substances or behaviors. So I just want to kind of glance at this. So we've got the Latin root word meaning sever or separate for dissociation. Dissociation is considered the opposite of mindfulness. Let's see here. It is considered, this is how people describe it, as zoning out, daydreaming, struggling to pay attention, and other ways that you would notice here, but not here. And once again, I can't reiterate enough that this is what our children are experiencing in school. So if I'm not going to go down the road of what the diagnosis is, but we've got a lot of students that are dissociating and unable to concentrate or focus because they're coming from chaos. And I'm sure that doesn't surprise a lot of you. Let's see, dissociative responses generally happen in either to protect the self or system or to meet a need. And then development will be interrupted. So then we're going to have developmental delays, just like you would with a client that starts using at a young age. I don't want to go into all of these words. It's a lot of words. But at the bottom is the point. We've got trauma. Then it becomes, looks like I spelled dissociation wrong, under the age of 7, which then ends up moving into an addiction, just approximately at the age of 12 and up. So what does all this mean? Addiction treatment must start to look more like trauma treatment. And it's not that addiction treatment must start to look more like, it's that addiction treatment has a lot of gaps in it. When looking at, I'm forgetting the name, shoot. When you're looking at levels of care, and I believe there's 5 of them, like I said, they're going to be gaps. The number one reason why addiction treatment runs into issues is because the client decides to either leave or they don't agree to the level of care. But so we need to figure out how to assist the client more. And there are a lot of tools that we use in trauma work that would be of huge assistance to those that are working with addiction. It's such a shame that we don't get together and, create a team where we're all working for the same outcome, which is the health of our clients. This is, once again, my website, and under resources, that's where you can find, there's addiction, dissociation, EMDR, and polyvagal. And I had set it up so that I could go into it. It was something I was messing around with, but to be honest with you, I'm not having the best luck with the internet today on this PowerPoint, so I'm not gonna even try it. So you can go find my website and mess around and find all the topics that we're talking about. I put out an addiction newsletter in December. I like to put out different topics, and December was addiction, and then January is PTSD and beyond. And the articles, once again, if I click on this, I just don't know where it's going to take me. But the articles in this letter, I would like for you to access because they all pertain to the research that's been done that connects trauma and dissociation. And connects trauma, dissociation, and addiction, and connects addiction to trauma. So I did my due diligence, and I found some excellent articles written by some very reputable people that have been doing this research for a while now. And so, like I said, I would love to click into these articles, but I'm worried I'm going to lose my PowerPoint. So if you guys could go to my website and go to newsletters, you can access the newsletter. Also in the newsletter is Gabor Monte's video that introduces us to not only addiction, but shame, which is going to be a topic that we're going to be talking about very soon. So let me move along.
Paula, I have another hand raised.
Yeah.
Okay. Gordon, go ahead.
Hello, good morning, Paula. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Gordon. How are you?
Fine. I wish to know, in the case where we have multiple traumatic experiences, and somebody has to work through the dissociation element and addiction element, which particular trauma should one emphasize to handle first? Should it be the most severe, or all the traumatic experiences leading to the dissociations? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And so when we have many traumas, we are looking at what's considered complex PTSD. That's the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. And complex PTSD has a different treatment plan, but the trauma that we focus on first is going to be the one that's the most activating for the client. So we call them points of disturbance. And so when we are working with our clients and we ask them, assuming that they're ready and prepared to do the work, we ask them and let the client advocate for themselves. What is it that they would like to target first? And usually what they target first is going to be where the most energy is, which is going to be the most activating.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just, to kind of use Gordon's question to point out, there is a lot of interesting psychoeducation around PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, around a one-time event like the 4th of July parade. Or we have complex PTSD, which is going to be repetitive betrayal, chronic, some type of either abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, or neglect that comes from childhood. So there's a big difference. The clients that I worked with at the parade that had a good enough childhood and had a secure-ish attachment and did not have any type of trauma, they were in and out with the trauma work in a very short amount of time. But those that have complex PTSD, the parade triggered so much for them that they will be in therapy for a year at least. So there's a difference between the two. So just know that, and that it's going to be our complex PTSD folks that are going to be 85% of them are going to be coming to you, struggling, if you are an addiction therapist, struggling with their addictions, their SUDs, and the trauma is the root cause of what they're experiencing. Okay, so
Hey, Paula.
uh-huh.
Sorry, I've got one more question coming to you.
Okay.
How long should a client be sober if that's needed before we get into the really activating material, i.e. sexual abuse?
Well, that's the thing. We have so many tools that we can use. I'm trying to think, I don't think I get into them because it's what I teach in the EMDR basic training is that we can target level of urge to use. We can target level of craving. We can target level of positive affect before use, and we can desensitize these. This would be helpful in sobriety. We don't even have to go into the trauma work until the client has several years of sobriety under their belt. But we have a lot that we can use that we use for PTSD, at least in the tool that I use. And this slide is telling you that there's 4 types of trauma work that we can be doing with our clients. There's so many things that we can be doing to help the client in their early sobriety that addiction therapists could really be utilizing. So how long? It's when the client's ready. In 12-step program, they say, don't go down the rabbit hole. Well, the rabbit hole is the trauma. And so we do want to go to the trauma when it's appropriate, but we don't need to wait for that to do trauma work. Does that make sense?
Great. Yes. Thank you. We've just said props to the EMDR toolbox.
Yes, exactly. Props to the EMDR toolbox. You got it. Okay, so here we've got, I just wanted to make sure I was fair. I have one slide for other types of trauma work. There are many different ways that we can work with a trauma. There's many different types of trauma-informed care. I just happen to be an EMDR trainer. And the reason I'm an EMDR trainer is not because I woke up and said, oh my gosh, I started as a therapist and I wanted to work with addiction. I started working with addiction and I was like, I can't do this. There's just not enough tools here. And so then I went out and got my own EMDR per somebody's suggestion. And then I went to a training and then I said, this is the answer. And that was 8 years ago. And this is the first presentation of many that I'm going to be doing where I finally have been able to put together how we can use our trauma-informed tools to help with addiction, because addiction needs the help. Okay, anyway, enough of that. So EMDR is here. And so there are, like I said, there are other ways that we can work with trauma. So it doesn't necessarily have to be trauma-informed. But at the end of the day, for trauma and for addiction, the key is that our clients are not lost in their world of dissociation. They're not lost in their world of their substance or their use, that we need to be able to have the client be present with us in the moment, as well as whatever it is that they're working on at the same time. And we call that dual awareness. We call that dual attention. In parts work, it's the child part versus the adult part. In EMDR, we call it dual awareness, I guess is what we would call it. So when we're doing addiction work, we need the client present and working on what they can do in the moment in order to stabilize themselves and to help with severing and separating from the pain in a present way. And so that's how we then move into this window of tolerance chart that is very popular, because just like with trauma, with our clients that are struggling with any type of addiction, and I'm thinking of any level of care that they're experiencing, that we're building up this window of tolerance for them. We are building up their ability to be present, to be regulated, to self-soothe. We're constantly talking about, different types of strategies. And this is where we lose our clients a lot. And there are a lot of trauma tools that can be very helpful. Also, when we move into a we'll talk about hyper and hypoarousal in a minute, but when we move into a hyperaroused state, when we move into anxiety or being overwhelmed or chaotic responses, outbursts, anger, rage, overeating, this is where we medicate ourselves. This is where we're uncomfortable. This is the pain that we want to separate ourselves from. So no matter what it is, if it's gambling or eating or porn, painkillers, whatever it is that the client uses, we have actual trauma tools that we can use to move our clients from this uncomfortable space to a comfortable space. So why don't we all get together and share our tools so that we can be helping all of the clients together? Now, of course, and a lot of you who work with me know how I feel about Dr. Stephen Porges came across recently in the last 20 years, the answer to all of our problems. It is everything that we need in both the addiction world and in the trauma world. And so basically, for those of you that saw my polyvagal video, a couple of these slides will look familiar, but we're meeting Dr. Stephen Porges, and we're also going to meet his son, Seth Porges, for a very specific reason. And so what we do is, and this is, like I said, this is for all of our clients, is we want to teach our clients about being in the different zones, different states. And thank goodness there's only 3 of them. So this is the state that we're teaching our clients that are struggling with anything, with any type of trauma response or any type of addictive behavior. We want them to be able to figure out how to be socially engaged, because recovery happens in community. We want them to be able to calm down their autonomic nervous system, to relax themselves. We have all these strategies that we're trying to teach our clients that are difficult. And then if our client moves into an activated state, which is where they're going to want to use or they're going to want to dissociate, when they're in that activated state, they're considered in their yellow zone. When they use a substance or they dissociate, when they sever from that pain, they are going into their red zone, because the red zone is, this is numbing. This is becoming invisible. This is where I'm no longer available. I'm somewhere else now. And what we have is what we call this, we call it the trauma traffic light, but we could take the word trauma off there for using it with our addiction clients. But we want to watch this video, and here I'm gonna make sure I'm not touching it. This is on my website under my polyvagal resources. Seth Porges is a comedian and an actor. So it is a very good, easy video to use to watch with our clients or have our clients watch it between sessions. And what he does is he explains polyvagal, and he explains it with utilizing the traffic light. So we talk about what happens when you're in your green zone. We talk about what happens in your yellow zone, and we talk about what happens in the red zone. And so what does that look like? Well, this is a chart that's also part of the polyvagal resources. This is where we want all of our clients to be. We want our trauma clients to be here. We want our addiction clients to be here. We want them to know how to be in what's called their green state, which is calm and connection. They're settled, they're grounded, they're able to be curious, compassionate, mindful. If you want to talk about what's going on with their physically, it gives you, details around digestion and heart rate. This is going to be a resting heart rate. And this is going to be a place of safety. And this is like, we want to teach all our clients how to go into this green state. When we move into our yellow state, this is where we become activated. This is where we become mobilized. There's danger. And danger for me and danger for you are going to be 2 totally different things, because my experience growing up is going to be different than your experience growing up. And we've made this determination that it's trauma, then it's addiction. So the trauma that everybody has experienced is going to be recorded or encoded in our brains in a different way. And so what triggers us is important, and triggers are important when we do addiction work. And so when we move into the yellow zone, our goal is to get back into the green zone. Now, what happens when the yellow zone doesn't go away and we can't get back to in our green zone? We go into red. And this is where all of our addictions sit. This is helplessness. This is depression, numbness, dissociation. So our trauma clients are dissociative. This is where shame is, shut down, hopelessness, feeling trapped. So this is where we drink, drug, we utilize our behaviors. It is a shutdown. It releases opiates. It is numbing. So if you're going to get numb by drinking, if you're going to get numb by dissociating, it's the same thing. And this is the red zone. And so we're giving our clients very easy language. Are you in red? Are you in yellow? Are you in green? When you went into red, what was it that happened in yellow that got you there? What are things that you can do to move yourself from yellow to green? We're just trying to make this simple, right? So just a little bit of a review, because some of you do know this. The green zone is the social engagement. Our heart rate is regulated at resting rate. We're able to breathe and relax. We have normal digestion. There's some stuff that goes on with voice reciprocity. I'm not going to go into it now. And it is the opposite of dissociation. And it is what you could call sobriety, if that's the language that you use. And it is the, well, we don't need to know that for right now. Then there's the yellow zone. And the yellow zone is going to be when I'm activated. It's going to be when I'm triggered, when I go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And fawning is codependence. It's a huge piece of our addiction work. Fawning is codependence, because if I'm codependent and I'm focusing on you, that means you can't hurt me. That means that you need me. And this is a system that we have a lot of clients that engage in because they grew up in homes where there was a lot of chaotic alcohol or drug use or mental health issues. And fawning is what saved them. That was in service of their survival. Let's see how we're doing on time. Boy, I can talk, can't I? And so this is our yellow zone. And then we move into our red zone. And our red zone means that yellow didn't go away. And now I want to disappear. I want to numb. I want to collapse. I want to climb under the blanket. I want to go to the bar. I want to use my drugs. I want to watch my porn. It's all the same thing. It disconnects us from whatever pain or experience that we're having that's so uncomfortable. And just to throw this out there, our heart rate drops considerably when we dissociate. And I know that different drugs and different behaviors are going to do different things with heart rate, but at least for dissociation, we see a dramatic drop in heart rate. Basically, people can get dizzy and pass out. The drop can be so intense. So we have tools. We have tools that talk about red. We have tools that talk about yellow. We have tools that talk about green. So we have lots of ways that we can talk to our clients. You know, in green, we have friends, fun, functioning. And then in our yellow, we have fight, flight, you know, they have lying, whatever. So we have tools. The way that we work with the clients is we want to create worksheets, and you can create your own, or you can use this. It's on my website. And here, this is trauma language, BASK. But basically, we want our clients to put language to what it's like for them when they're in green, what it's like for them when they're in yellow, and what it's like for them when they're in red. Because yellow is going to be the triggers around and the behaviors that lead to use, that lead to addictive behavior. And green is going to be our goal. And red is going to be when we have relapsed, when we've given up, or when we've automatically dissociated. Jamie Marich, who is doing some wonderful work with dissociation right now, talks about her own journey and how when she stopped using and became sober, her dissociation really picked up because that's what she was able to utilize when she was a kid. So now you have a client that may not be using drugs and alcohol or their behaviors, but you've got a client that's highly dissociative. And so you've still got some problems that you need to work with. Here's an example of a sheet that got filled out by a client when they're in their green versus when they're in their yellow versus when they're in their red. And so, you know, we got, I just typed it in here, and I like to start with yellow because this is going to be where a client is triggered and they're activated and there's something that's really bothering them that they are going to want to medicate at some point. And some of the behaviors that come with that, they talk loud, they talk over people, they feel uptight and annoyed. Their body is uncomfortable, it's tight, they get a dry mouth, and they feel that they're trapped or powerless or that they don't trust. And then here we have just some questions to kind of activate what the client is experiencing. They feel about the environment that it's crazy and uncomfortable, and that I don't get it, and I don't need to be in, or I need to be in control, would be some of the things that they would feel about themselves. If they were to then move into green, this would be examples of how they feel about themselves or what they're experiencing when they're in the green zone, in that social connection zone. And then up here in the red, this is where we're using, and this is where we're highly dissociative. I am confused and lost. My environment is depressing. I'm in bed. I'm sad. I'm lethargic. I don't care. I'm hopeless. I'm helpless. And so if you're working with a client that is, working on their sobriety, this would all be more sobriety focused. And then this would be another worksheet that comes with it that I find to be helpful, because we want to identify what state the client is in and what triggers the state, so that we can understand the state that the client's in before we figure out what the story is. So for example, moments I'm in this state. Well, when I'm drinking, I'm in this state. When I am I can't get out of bed and I can't get off the couch, or when I'm watching hours and hours of Netflix, I'm in this state. I'm in this state when I get triggered by loud voices or arguing or conflict or, my boss at work. Very specific times when we're triggered, going into the fight, flight, more mobilized, activated state. And this is heart rate. This is when our heart rate goes up, and this is when our heart rate comes down. But this is our regulated state. This is our goal. And what is it that we can do that helps us connect with and be in our window of tolerance, where we would be enjoying or appreciating or engaging in sobriety, like going to meetings, working with a sponsor. And then these are how we move in and out. Every time I get a text message from my ex-husband, I move into yellow. And how do I get out of it? I go for a walk around the block. So I go back into green. So this is where we start talking about strategies that we can utilize to move us in and out, because you can't go from red to green. And red is our use. Red is when we're medicating, we're separating, we're severing, if it's through dissociation or if it's through some type of substance use disorder or behavior. So getting into that green, what does that look like? And so this is, once again, just some examples that we can be utilizing with our clients. I did an example.
Paula, I just want to
Yep.
jump in. There's a few questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So one slide says we use substances and addiction is activated in yellow zone, and one says in red zone. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So the red zone is when you're in your use. So yellow zone, I'm triggered, I'm upset. I go and I have 3 beers, 5 beers, 6 beers, and now I'm in red.
Okay.
Yep.
Um,
And that's
Right.
exactly how dissociation works too.
Okay. What do you suggest working with a patient that was incarcerated and is still stuck in hyperarousal constantly and is still on probation and in fear but wants help? Do you just work on regulation over and over? Thoughts, suggestions? Yes.
So one of my colleagues who works my EMDR training actually works in I forget which county it is, but anyway, the point is that we're giving it language. And so Daniel Siegel tells us, name it to tame it. The client would be able to say, I am in yellow all the time. And then the therapist would teach them how, when they go into red, what that feels like, how they used to go into red using, let's say, their drugs, but now they're incarcerated and now they go into red by dissociating. Able to give them language and start working on strategies to move into the green. And so if you're an EMDR therapist and you're in your yellow, which is going to be triggers, and you identify what the triggers are, we go in and we desensitize triggers all the time using EMDR. That's what trauma work does, is it desensitizes what's disturbing. And so we can be using that to be helping our clients that are stuck in yellow all the time, and to start introducing to them what green is. Does that make sense? And we have tools for that. We're not just saying it. We actually have tools on how to do that.
Okay, and we have one more, and this is from about a little 15 minutes ago, so I apologize for not catching it sooner. Have you had times where it was difficult to figure out what a client's trauma is or was, or client didn't consider the event, situation, et cetera, as trauma?
Yes, and it doesn't matter, because and I'm speaking about EMDR here, and I can't speak to the other ones, but EMDR is the natural healing process of the brain. So when I'm doing a talk therapy session, I am the healer. But when we do EMDR, the brain is the healer. The brain will go find what needs to be healed. It doesn't tell me. I don't know. Sometimes the client doesn't know, but the brain will go in and do what it needs to do. And my most extreme example of that would be my client that was in a car accident when she was in utero, and her trauma is the loss of her twin. And so I couldn't go there. I didn't even know that was there. But with EMDR, which is just the trauma treatment that I teach, EMDR was able to go there and to heal that trauma. So with EMDR, not narrative, because narrative, you need to know the story. But with EMDR, we do not need to know what the trauma is, because the brain is going to go find it on its own. Make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Paula.
Yeah, which then once again reiterates, why are we not sharing our tools? Because if we can go in and heal trauma naturally, and trauma is what's feeding into a client's use, why wouldn't we want to go in and heal what's feeding into the use to then help the client and the need to use to dissipate? All right. Okay. So this is just a kind of a basic example. It's not anything too traumatic here. So this is how the green and the yellow and the red works. I head to work and I have coffee with my colleagues. I'm in my green zone, where I'm present and calm and socially connected. And the conversation at the time is very pleasant as we discuss our pets. Green zone topic. Everybody puts their pets in the green zone. As I'm sitting enjoying the conversation, I get a text from my ex-husband. I immediately enter into the yellow zone. My body is anticipating danger. My heart rate is increasing due to past traumatic experiences with my ex and my stepfather, which would be their past present trauma experience. As I start to open the text messages and see swear words and my child's name, I immediately go into my red zone. A sudden drop in heart rate, my body is shutting down due to the powerlessness and helplessness, since my ex appears to have the control financially, legally, etc. I am now shut down and dissociating. I have been sober for 2 years from Xanax, which would used to take me from my red or yellow to my red zone, which would have assisted me with the anxiety that I experienced when I was getting a divorce. But I know now that I can call my sponsor and reach out to my fellowship if I need to. But I also know that my autonomic nervous system has kicked in to assist me and as a means to survive. And I practice with my therapist that should I get back into my green zone, which is to get up, walk around, increase my heart rate, re-enter my yellow zone, to then go back into my, and put on my green zone playlist while walking around the block, utilizing my 4-7-8-4 breathing strategies. So my goal is to re-enter my green zone so that I can access my prefrontal cortex and logically think about the best plan for reading this text and its threatening context. So the point is that we understand the autonomic nervous system. We know what it's like to be in green. We know what types of things trigger us into yellow. And we know that we used to shut down by using drugs, but now what we're doing is figuring out other ways that we can move back into green instead of red, which is for this particular client to get up, walk around, put on her green zone playlist, which she created herself, and to do her 4-7-8-4 breathing. That's just a very basic example of the types of scenarios that we start to work on with our clients. And when thinking about the triggers, right, we have triggers. I love these trigger worksheets, and I'm sure you guys that are working with addiction already have a plethora of resources when it comes to identifying triggers. But these worksheets, and there's also a link. Where's the link? I think it's maybe on the next page. No, link didn't show up. Anyway, I have a link that takes us to these worksheets, and it also measures when you're in this trigger, if it's, you know, if it's like a 10 or as far as intensity, or if it's a 5 or if it's a 1. And what we do with the EMDR is we go in, and this is actually comes from my EMDR training, is we go in and we identify the triggers, and we start desensitizing the triggers one at a time. And what we're told is that this is the triggers and this is the grip of the addiction. And as we desensitize one trigger at a time, it loosens the grip of the addiction. And so as we're doing that, we're teaching our clients how to exit out of the yellow zone by not using what's red. And if they do use what's red, they can put language to it. But our goal is to go into the green. And what does green look like? Well, we've been working on it and defining it here, and we're giving it language. And like I said, just the red, yellow, green just makes life so easy. And, you know, I'm grateful that it's just the 3 states. And so this is just an example, one example of many different ways that we can be helping, applying the work that we learn in our trauma-informed teachings that could definitely be integrated into addiction work that would be, you know, hugely helpful. So I know that once again, you know, I kind of blow through these topics, but this is not necessarily like, you know, the worksheets. If you go to the polyvagal resource on my website, you watch the video, you use this chart, and you do the worksheets. That's all you need to be able to manage polyvagal from a polyvagal 101 perspective. And so that would be the, you know, what literally is being offered up here. And what I would recommend is that you do it on yourself first, because for us to know our own triggers, our own green zone activities, how we move in and out, we all have red zones. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily, like you said, it can be food, it can be porn, it can be, you know, it can be hours and hours of Netflix. It can be all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's what takes you out of the pain, right? So any questions coming up here before I finish up with the polyvagal piece?
Yep, there's just one. It says, when you are desensitizing triggers, do you do a float back and try to find the genesis, or use EMD?
When using clients that are early in sobriety, we do not do float backs. And that is the beauty of this tool. We only desensitize what we do, the 2-prong protocol instead of the 3-prong, which is present day and future triggers only.
Great,
For those
thank
of you that are EMDR trained. We don't do the 3rd prong until the client's ready. Make sense?
Makes sense. That's it.
Good. Okay, so talking points, takeaways for just the polyvagal. The original trauma of our client symptoms replaces patterns of connection with patterns of protection. So that's the gist. And so what we want to do is figure out how to move our clients from patterns of protection back into patterns of connection. As a traumatized child's adaptive survival responses, the survival responses replace the social engagement. So like we were talking about the child that lies a lot. That child that lies a lot is utilizing that lying as an adaptive survival strategy. So it's understanding the state that the client's in before we understand the story, because the client was in red or yellow. I didn't use yellow here because you couldn't read it. So sorry about that. And then moving into, with the work that we're doing, into social engagement. And remember, recovery is in community. So that social engagement piece is important. And then activating co-regulation, especially when unavailable, dangerous, or going offline. And that co-regulation piece, once again, we cannot access our prefrontal cortex. We cannot access all of our coping strategies when we are in yellow and red. So you have a client that gets sent to Compass and, okay, so, or not Compass, sorry, Family Recovery Center. And they learn all kinds of DBT and CBT skills. And then they go back into their home. And that's why it's beautiful that you guys work with the parents. So important. But they go back into the home and the same triggers are there, that they're not going to be able to access what they learned. And they're going to be, their behavior is going to be identical to what it was before they went into the higher level of care to begin with. So we need change on both ends. Now, I can go in there with my EMDR and I can desensitize how triggered you get when mom looks at you and yells at you that way. So trauma-informed care can definitely be more helpful. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get back into that green zone, that self-regulated state.
Paula, we've got one more about this. It says, when desensitizing triggers, do you fill out a target sequence plan while using the 2 prongs?
So the target sequencing plan would only be present and future. So you would not go into the past. That would be too activating. You could use a target sequencing plan. I'm sorry, this is EMDR talk, to identify the 20-80 rule. 20% is about today, 80% comes from the past, to give the client, you know, kind of that name it to tame it, so that they understand why. Like when you are called lazy by your boss, you are activated by your drunk father that called you a lazy fat slob your whole life. You could use it that way, but we have to be careful with how activating that is. So as far as early sobriety, which is kind of what we're focusing on here, early sobriety would only be using present day and future triggers.
Okay, thank you.
And so Deb Dana's book is the book to get for polyvagal. She doesn't use the traffic light. She uses a ladder. That's what I used to teach, but she asked me to remove it, so I did. But her book really explains polyvagal in great detail. And so if you're looking for a book to read on polyvagal, that's what I would recommend. So we're going to do shame, and then that's where we're going to end. I think I said we would do 3, but I feel like as far as time goes, but let's see. But yeah, because I want to be able to do some questions. Shame is something in my world that nobody talks about. I don't know where it is. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think maybe one of the reasons why, you know, like Justin Wolf, he's on LinkedIn a lot. He does great work and he's doing a lot of presentations on shame. And I know that, like I said, this is the engineering part of me. I want to know what to do about it. Like, I want to know how to fix it. And that's why I'm an EMDR therapist, because the work, 20 minutes of EMDR is equivalent to 5 hours of talk therapy. So talk about being efficient. Not that you want to do that with a client that is early in sobriety, please, by all means. But as far as doing trauma work, it's really powerful. And so there's a protocol out there that's being worked on for shame. So Dr. Nicole LaPera, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, she does some really wonderful work. This is a quote from her book. The insights I gained into the nervous system and polyvagal theory allowed me to shed something that had long been holding me back, and that is shame. And so once again, looking at the green, the yellow, and the red, once a client understands that the autonomic nervous system is automatic and that the nervous system is going to respond before you, the client, are even going to know what's going on, then that takes a lot of the shame away, because shame is going to be how a client feels about their behavior. So What is shame? Oh, shoot, we can't watch, okay, Gabramonte's video. All right, I'm leaving the PowerPoint so we can watch Gabramonte's video because it's the key to what shame is. So what is shame? What can we do? Change the brain, change the shame. That's kind of cute. EMDR, when we go in with EMDR, once again, I am going to talk about EMDR because that's the therapist I am. The changes that we make are transformational. They are permanent. We don't change the memory, but we change the client's response to the memory. And so what Gabramonte talks about here is how when you grow up in a traumatic environment, which once again is the point of this whole presentation, your clients that you're working with that are struggling with any type of a SUD, substance use disorder diagnosis, has some type of traumatic origin. And that as long as the client has to figure out how to get their needs met, to stay within the attachment of whoever it is that is their primary caregiver, they are sacrificing their authenticity. They are being groomed. I know that's a strong word, but I needed to make my point. They are being groomed to behave in a certain way in order to get what they need from that primary caregiver. That grooming, that shift in who they need to be, that is the shame. And it does not belong to us. It does not belong to our clients. And we need to give it back. It is the only, it's not a part. It is a part that holds the shame. And that shame needs to be returned, sent out into the universe, because it never should have been ours to begin with. Had we had a good enough, secure enough attachment, a good enough family system, right? We would not have had to change ourselves. We would have not had to focus on attachment in service of our own survival, which changed us as people and pulled us away from who we were really supposed to be. That I am bad, because guilt is I did something bad and I do it differently next time. But shame is I am bad. And that I am bad is what the client had to hold and embrace in order to live, to survive with their maladaptive attachment figure. Makes it, I say makes sense. I can't see any of you. So, okay. So with that being said, we're going to, I'm going to actually close out the PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do this. And I'm going to, so ladies, we might have a problem here because I don't know if I can play off of YouTube, but we'll find out in a minute. And we're going to end with this video, and it is on my website. So you guys can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to find out if everything is shut down here or not. Let's see here. I'm going into, just so you know where it is, I'm going into resources, and I'm going into, it's at the bottom of EMDR resources because we do talk about shame. And it's, the video is called Authenticity versus Attachment. And okay, here it is. And I have a feeling, to be honest, that this is not going to work, but let's see. Here's the video. And you guys can see it, right?
Yes.
Can you hear it?
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
Let me
Okay.
see
Do
if I
you
can
guys want to
pull-
pull it
yeah,
up?
let me
It's
try and see if I can.
Gabramonte.
Yeah. hold
Yeah.
on.
Authenticity versus attachment. If we could end on that, that would be beautiful. If we can't, it is what it is. And let me stop sharing screen here.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
This is shame.
When the child is born, the child has two needs. The first need is for attachment. And attachment is contact, connection, love.
Ryan, we can't hear it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not hearing it either.
A parenting figure. As soon as you get to the level of birds now, the baby bird has to have an attachment with the parents. The parents have to be attached to the baby. Otherwise, the infant simply does not survive. Mammalians even more so, and most so the human, because we're the least developed, the least mature, with the least developed brains, and the most dependent for the longest period of time of any creature in the universe. So our attachment needs are enormous, and they remain important throughout lifetime because we have to have attachments to form societies, social groups, without which we don't survive. So attachment is a huge need. Be able to connect, belong, be loved by, and love. That's just a basic human need. But we have another need as well, which is for authenticity. Authenticity is the capacity, as I said earlier, to know what we feel, to be in touch with our bodies, and to be able to express who we are and manifest who we are in our activities and in our relationships. Now, why is that? Well, think of a human being in the evolutionary period who's not in touch with their body and their gut feelings. How long do they survive out there in the wild? So authenticity is another huge survival need. Great. So far, so good. But what happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity? In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. So I convey that message many times to my children, believe me, without any conscious desire to do so. In fact, it was the very opposite of what I wished to convey. But that they're not acceptable the way they are, with their emotions the way they are, that's the message my kids got when they were small. And most children get that in our society. And what does a child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are. And somebody asks us, what do you feel? You say, I have no idea. And how many times we've all had the experience of having an inkling of a strong gut feeling, but we're ignoring it. We're ignoring it and we get into trouble. Well, that tells us what happened. What happened was that at some point we found out it was too costly for our attachment relationships to be in touch with our gut feelings. So then it becomes our first, not our first nature, but our second nature, to suppress our feelings, to lose touch with ourselves, and to suppress our gut feelings. And then we pay the cost later on in the form of addictions, mental illness, or any range of physical illnesses. But it all began with this tragic conflict that children should never be confronted with, but are all the time, between authenticity on the one hand and attachment on the other. And even as adults, so many people are suffering because they want to be themselves, but they're afraid to be because they know, or at least they fear that if they're themselves, they're going to lose important attachment relationships in their life.
Okay, so we utilized this basic understanding to define what the attachment needs were in order to survive, what was sacrificed. We get rid of what we don't need anymore, and we start honing in on and embracing what it is that we wish we had had or that we should have had growing up as part of our authenticity. And once again, we've got a lot of tools and strategies. I think that's where program comes in. 12-step program does a lot of that work. as far as strengthening and enhancing our clients' positive neural networks. And there's a lot we can do with the EMDR to also move that along. And yeah, so that's that. And so thanks, guys, for coming. I hope this was helpful.
Wonderful, Paula. Thank you as always for all of the information. That video is very powerful. So thanks again for all of that. Obviously, EMDR Chicago is the website for all the resources. And then the video will be on our website, which is familyrecoverycenters.com. You will also be receiving an email with how to obtain your CEUs and with the PowerPoint as well. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Wednesday. And Paula, thank you so much for joining
You're
us.
welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.